Good afternoon, everybody. Respected international national faculties, esteemed delegates, colleagues, and my beloved students. I welcome you all in the virtual platform of the Eastern India Eco and Imaging Conclave 2021 amidst the dangerous second wave of corona pandemic. But life and science should go on. Forget about our depression, monotonousness of our state of mind, and let's refresh with fresh air of scientific fest. And now I am inviting the Secretary, CSI West Bengal branch, to give his welcome speech and to inaugurate the conclave.
Good afternoon. I cordially welcome all the faculties, delegates, and the dignitaries present here in this Eastern India Eco and the Imaging Conclave 2021, organized by CSI West Bengal branch. Our organization is committed to academic research activities, benevolent and public awareness program. We all know that we are fighting through a COVID-19 pandemic state. We have lost some brave warriors and we pay our homage to the departed souls. I salute to all the COVID heroes for their untiring efforts in this time of distress. I pray for safety and healthy life of everybody, and we will together overcome the second wave of the ongoing pandemic very soon. Under the circumstances, we are digitally hosting the first conference of this year of our organizations under the supervision of Dr. B.N. Jha as the organizing secretary and Dr. Aniruddha De as the chairman scientific committee. This conference of 2020 with the same organizing team could not be held due to the corona situation. So I am sure you all will be overwhelmed with this presentation of the scientific deliberations by the state level, national and international level of experts and dignitaries, and with the delicacies of the virtual exhibition of the event by the organizing team. I wish for the grand success of the conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ghosh, for his welcome speech and inauguration of the conclave. Now I have a very pleasant task to introduce our MC, Miss Chandrima Rai, who will take you to the whole conclave for the 2 days, today and the tomorrow of your scientific feast, and you will enjoy the show. Chandrima, please.
Dr. Day for the wonderful and warm introduction. Welcome to all the dignitaries and the participants to the Eastern India Eco and Imaging Conclave 2021. And here we are all set to go for the scientific program for our session one for today is case presentation. My best guest is I'll not forget. The session is sponsored by the unrestricted academic grant from the Torrent Pharmaceutical. Can we have the AV, please? Shall we have the AV, please? In order to execute this session, may I please request the chairperson to take over the responsibility, and may I please request Sri Ananda Dr. Ananda Vallabh Nagori, Dr. Amal Kumar Khan, Dr. Sajan Krishna Banerjee, Dr. Konok Kumar Mitro, Dr. Raja Roy, Dr. Deepankar Ghosh Joshidar, Dr. Tony Tanundi, Dr. Sunandam Shikar, and Dr. Vikas Singh to start and execute the session. All the discussions about each of the cases will be done at the end of this session, and I'd like to request all the speakers and the chairpersons to restrict the presentation and the discussion as well by the speaking at this time so that we get an opportunity to listen to all these. Thank you. May I now please request the chairperson to start the session.
Good afternoon. Let us start the first session, the case which I will not forget. So for this session, I will request the first speaker. Who is the first speaker? First speaker, I am inviting the first speaker. Please. First speaker.
Yeah, correct, yeah.
The case one is surgical treatment is the only option but, and a speaker for this topic is Dr. B.S.
Respected chairperson, sir, my dear friends, I am showing the patient of Mr. R.D. Misra, 57-year male, and it is the event of 2007. My patient was having sudden onset weakness of right half of the body. Patient was denying any complaint of convulsion, chest pain, palpitation. The patient was a recently diagnosed case of diabetes hypertension. He was on anti-diabetic, anti-hypertension treatment. And patient on examination, all the BP, pulse, JBP normal. Patient systemic examination, mein cardiovascular system, there was a LOD S1. There was a faint diastolic murmur in mitral area. And the no carotid bruit was possible. Abdomen normal. Power was 3/5 in right-sided. The left-sided was normal power. There was a cerebellar fine movement and dysfunction. All cranial nerves was intact. So basically, 57-year male in 2007, having known diabetes, hypertension, sudden onset right-sided complete hemiplegia, gradually recovered near completely with some fine movement in right hand with mild intentional tumor. At the same time, there was diagnosed diastolic murmur at apex. So clinically, after then, we investigated the patients. Most of the blood reports was normal. ESR was 67, LFT, RFT, all blood was normal. Thyroid lipid profile normal. Then X-ray was showing no cardiomegaly, lung function was normal. CT scan, there was an acute infarction in brain, particularly AICF territories. Right cerebral infarction was noted. So then things ECG normal, 75 minutes, no LV change, sinus rhythm, PR interval normal. The whole thing is when we did the echo in 2007 in February 5th, there was a significant large size atrial mass, left atrial originating myxoma was noticed. It was in 5 into 2.8, protruding in LV, fragile, single, pedunculated. LVID DS normal, valves very mild, grade 1 MR, and no significant pulmonary hypertension. This are then we consult the patient and plan for the angio, cath, and subsequently there was in cath there was contrast negative vagal shadow suggestive of myxoma in lipophagy. The whole thing is that it was a diabetes hypertension with atrial myxoma with one episode of embolic. We consult the patient, we treated with our cardiac surgeon, consulted surgeons, and finally urgent resections was planned, done in 2000. Patient improved very well, and up to 2009, every 6 monthly we did the follow-up. It was no residual trauma. But what happened surprisingly in 2009, when again during follow-up, there was a 4.5 around one large mass again reappears at the same site of the recurrence of this. And it was a 4.2. Again, it was a very frightening per patient, but it was surprising for me. And finally, we see that we counsel the patient, and anyhow, patient agreed for go for the surgeon. I consulted the cardiac surgeon. Sir said, okay, this time we'll do more deep resection and more. We will send the patient. We'll do it. Whole things was done very well. Everything gone well. In 2009, second time deep resection was done. It was a purely benign in nature. And finally, 10, 11, 12, 13, every 6 monthly, we did the follow-up and no recurrence of myxoma. But the story started again in the 2014, that again the growth of myxoma was seen in 2014 to 4.2 into 2, and the patient was having no other features. But this time when the surgical option, absolutely 2-time sternotomy and deep bypass through, he underwent for that. He refused to go for the further surgery. Then the patient's treatment plan may further redo cardiac surgery absolutely was not agree. So what we are then discussed with the patients and our surgeon, finally we have put on antihypertensive and warfarin, metformin, ecosprin. And last 7 years, continuously 6 monthly we are following. By luckily, no any embolic episode was seen. And finally, this is the recent video we are sharing here. That there is a growth. It was initially 3.5, 4.5, up to 4.5 and near 5 centimeter. Now it is the same things, and patients absolutely now on the medical. The surgical option is absolutely denying what this. So regrowth of the recurrence of the myxoma, it is the one of the 2 times after surgery and same type of growth, same place, and seeing the very frightening for the patient here. And finally, after this, why patients absolutely doing the INR PT and warfarin completely according to maintaining that data and doing well since 7-8 years, and last 14 years it has published. So what by this case, what the best case I have kept, that surgical option with cardiac myxoma is the most common primary tumor we all are seeing. 75% in LA, 20% in RA. 90% are solitary in nature, pedunculated, gelatinous. 35% are having the embolic episode, and all the emboli valvular tried. But the recurrence rate is only 2 to 3%. So it is one of the rare case of 2 to 3%. Recurrent usually appear first 4 years. The first time in my case in 2 years, next time after 4 years. And primary myxoma is more common in women. Here it is a man, but tumor recurrence more common in the men. So here this man, R.D. Misra, is having this problem. On all 4 mechanisms explaining, like inadequate resection. Secondary, we did the complete curettage with the consultancy of the surgeon. And then also it was the what is the theory? There are 4 theory. One, adequate in resection, totipotent multiplicity, metastasis, or familial. We did the screening of all the familial members. Everything was normal. And the one member is the Carney complex like picture, very rarely seen. Here it was not present, no other tumors of the various things. And the first case of this myxoma was reported by Jarvod in 1967. So ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Chairman, sir, this patient was having a recurrent myxoma of the 3 to particularly 2 times, and third time also there is a presence of this. We have no option, but this is a very rarely seen, very vigilant, and by the counseling of that, all surgical options we have opted, and only medical follow-up we are doing. It is rarest among rare patients, and particularly this type of case surprises us. That's why we have kept as a best case of our follow-up in EcoLab. With these few words, I wish all my audience, all my thing, have a very corona-free of this one. Thank you very much to all of you. Thank you, sir.
And with that, we will move on to our next speaker. And the next speaker for this session is Dr. Devika Chatterjee, and she will talk about best phase of my life.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to present the best case of my life. I did it in the year 2010, but still I remember this case as my best case. A patient was a 18 years female, had an outside diagnosis of rheumatic heart disease, presented to us with history of shortness of breath in NYHA class 3 for last 1 year. She didn't have any history of chest pain, but definitely she had a history of rheumatic fever in her early childhood. On physical examination, we got the apex beat in fifth intercostal space. S1 was loud, there was opening snap, and a mid-diastolic rumbling murmur with pre-systolic accentuation.
Devika, share your skin, share your
Slide.
skin.
Slide
Skin
দেখা
is
যাচ্ছে না।
slide দেখা যাচ্ছে না। Yeah, now is okay. Now is okay.
Okay.
Full scale PowerPoint, full scale.
Can you see?
No, it's gone.
Okay, then I'll start again sharing, huh? Just a second. Oh, it's gone.
হ্যাঁ বল না বা জানতে ওরা পারবে না, ওরা কেউ নিয়ে আসেনি, তুই বলবি, আমি বলে দিচ্ছি। ওটা তুই বলে দিবি। হ্যাঁ ও ওয়েট করতে হবে না।
Can you see? Hello?
No, madam.
Oh.
No, we can't see.
Again, share screen, ma'am.
We can only see you.
Sorry, sir. Sorry, it got disconnected, I think, or what?
Okay, take your time, no problem.
Can Dr. Shahbaz Qureshi hear me, see me?
Dr. Qureshi has joined.
Yes, thank
Yeah.
you, Dr. Parashar.
How are you?
I'm
Nilofer,
fine,
how
thank-
are you?
Hi, thank you, sir. How are you, sir?
Welcome,
Well,
Dr.
all
Qureshi,
well.
sir. I am Dr. Anirudh De from Kolkata.
I know,
Welcome, Welcome,
it's
sir.
about 5.
Thank
It's
you
about
very much.
5:30 in the morning in USA. So
Sir, I am sorry to bother you, but
And
no
Dr.
problem, no
I-
problem.
but I told you, your beloved student can ask anything from you.
Dr. Parashar is a young man.
Yeah, let us now continue.
Madam,
Okay.
দেখা যাচ্ছে।
দেখা যাচ্ছে। Well, fine. Start. Unmute. Devika, unmute. Unmute, Devika. Well.
Okay. So, all the findings were suggestive of mitral stenosis. Apex beat was in fifth space, S1 was loud, opening snap was present, and diastolic rumbling. On echocardiography in the our ECG and chest X-ray were within normal limits. And in transthoracic echo, in the parasternal long axis, we got an enlarged left atrium. LV size was normal with good systolic function. And mitral valve leaflets were thickened. There was diastolic doming of the anterior mitral leaflet. PML was fixed, and there was thickening of the chordae. All were suggestive of rheumatic mitral stenosis. Then with color flow, we got the stenotic flow across the mitral valve. As you can see, there was a stenotic flow across the mitral valve, and the aortic valve was normal. Then in apical four-chamber view, I got a flow which was suggestive of rheumatic mitral valve stenosis, and the LV size was normal with no regional wall motion abnormality. And the CW Doppler across the mitral valve gave us a gradient of 5 millimeter of mercury, which was mean gradient, and mitral valve area was 1.2 square centimeter. She had a very trivial tricuspid valve regurgitation. As you can see here, very trivial tear with a tear gradient of 17 millimeter of mercury. Till now, this was a case of rheumatic mitral stenosis with a valve area of 1.2 and no pH. But as I started looking at the tear, I got some abnormal flows in the interventricular septum. The flows are suggestive of myocardial collateral flow. Why a patient of rheumatic mitral stenosis should have these abnormal myocardial collateral flows? And again, when I looked at the color flow across the RV outflow tract, I could see an abnormal flow in the main pulmonary artery before its bifurcation. So what it can be? Is it a coronary cameral fistula? So I started looking at the coronary arteries. Now in the parasternal short axis view at the level of the great vessels, where we look for the coronary arteries, we couldn't see the origin of the left coronary artery. On the other hand, I got a very dilated right coronary artery. As you can see, the right coronary artery was so much dilated that just by tilting the probe in the parasternal long axis, I could see a dilated right coronary artery. So where is the left coronary artery? Now I went to, again, the parasternal views and started looking for the left coronary artery in the modified views. This is a high parasternal view where I have opened the main pulmonary artery in its long axis. As you can see, this is the pulmonary valve, this is aorta. And to my surprise, I saw that left coronary artery was in fact arising from the pulmonary artery. And soon after its origin, it was dividing into LAD and LCX. And the LAD, LCX, along with the left main, were dilated. And with the color flow, I could see a blue flow in the LAD and a red flow at the site of insertion of the left main and a red flow in the LCX, which is just the reverse of normal flow pattern in the left coronary artery system. As you can see, in the LAD, normally we get a red flow and a blue flow in the LCX, whereas here we got a blue flow in the LAD and a red flow in the LCX. So this is a case of by echocardiography. I diagnosed this as a case of L-kappa along with rheumatic mitral stenosis with valve area of 1.2 without any pH. To confirm the diagnosis, a coronary angiogram was done where the left coronary artery could not be located in any of the coronary sinuses of Valsalva, whereas selective right coronary angiogram revealed a single large tortuous right coronary artery, as you can see, and multiple collaterals, intercoronary collaterals, which were moving over the RV surface, interventricular septum, and the apex, and they were connected to the left coronary artery, which was draining into the pulmonary artery. So a diagnosis of L-kappa or anomalous origin of left coronary artery from pulmonary artery was diagnosed, which is a very rare congenital anomaly occurring only in 1 in 3 lakhs live birth, and only 10 to 15% of these cases reach the adulthood. And the clinical expression of L-kappa begins after the birth with the morphological and functional changes which take place in the pulmonary circulation. After birth, till the age of 4 to 6 weeks, we know that pulmonary arterial pressure remains high. So the left coronary artery receives the blood from the pulmonary artery. Though it is unsaturated, desaturated, but still there is some blood in the left coronary artery. LV, with its high demand of oxygen, still suffers from ischemia, but left coronary artery at least receives some blood. But after 6 weeks, as there is fall of pulmonary arterial pressure, if there is no collateral, the left coronary artery system neither receives blood from the pulmonary artery nor from the right coronary artery, and death occurs. If there are formation of collaterals, survival is possible. Now, even if there are collaterals, there is a phenomenon called pulmonary coronary steal. You see, the left coronary artery is connected to the low pressure pulmonary artery. So the collateral flow tends to go to the low pressure pulmonary artery rather than high resistance myocardial vessels. So that results in pulmonary coronary steal with left to right shunt. The volume of shunt is small in relation in terms of cardiac output, but it is quite large in terms of the coronary flow reserve. So as a result of which there is myocardial ischemia, LV dysfunction, and even sudden cardiac death. In spite of various types of insults the heart is facing, the 15% of the patients still can sustain the myocardial function at rest as well as with exercise, and they reach the adulthood. The diagnosis of L-kappa is a very, very difficult when especially the patient presents in adulthood. Usually the patients of L-kappa present in infancy or early childhood with congestive heart failure, and while doing echo, we get certain indirect echocardiographic clues like LV systolic dysfunction, regional wall motion abnormality like we get in myocardial infarction due to the infarction of the LAD territory, and bright papillary muscles due to scarring or mitral regurgitation. Well, in adulthood, we get only few signs like dilated right coronary artery, which we got in this case, which is a sign of extensive collateralization between right coronary artery system and the left coronary artery system, along with myocardial collaterals in the IVS. We had both these echocardiographic clues in my patient. So these are the indirect echo signs. With these signs, once we suspect, we should immediately go for detailed imaging of coronary artery to confirm the diagnosis. So to conclude, I would say this is my best case because this is the rarest of the rare combination of congenital heart disease and acquired heart disease in an adult. And moreover, L-kappa is a very, very rare congenital anomaly with serious negative consequences. If I would have missed L-kappa in this case, as happens frequently with the echocardiography, this girl would have developed myocardial ischemia, MI, or sudden cardiac death in near future, which we could stop with immediate surgical intervention, and we saved the patient. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chatterjee. And with that, we will move on to the next speaker for the session. May I please request Dr. Vijay Sangam to present the case of the incredible shrinking body. Dr. Sangam.
Thank you so much. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I thank the organizers for inviting me to present in this session. I'm sharing my slide. Are my slides visible?
Yes.
So I was told to present a case, my best case, which I will not forget. I would say that not just my best case, which I will not forget, this is also my worst case, which I will not forget. This is the case of the incredible shrinking valve, an unusual cause of mitral stenosis. This was a 28-year-old female who was a known case of rheumatic heart disease, complained of increasing dyspnea on exertion. She had a transthoracic echo in 2018, December. This was the echo. So we can see that the valve is thickened, there is some restriction of mobility, and there is a significant mitral regurgitation with an LV dilatation. LV function is good. As we can see, contractility is quite good, and the mitral valve opening is reasonably good, though there is some commissural fusion. The stenosis is not significant. The mean gradient across the mitral valve is 4 millimeters of mercury. So we diagnosed a moderate to severe mitral regurgitation with no significant mitral stenosis. So this case was referred to us by a cardiothoracic surgeon who was keen to repair this valve. So he did a repair in the first week of 2019. He did an annuloplasty plus repair of the PML with the pericardium. The patient was extubated a few hours after the surgery and was stable. However, on the second post-operative day, the first post-operative day, surgery was repeated. Now, as you can imagine, the acoustic windows were not very good, but we can see the annuloplasty ring in situ. But what we also observe there is restriction of mobility of the mitral valve, and we can see turbulent flow across the valve now. The short axis view, again, not very good, but the mobility is certainly, the opening of the valve is certainly much less than it was earlier. We can see the highly turbulent flow across the valve. And the mean gradient across the mitral valve is now 14.9. This is significantly stenosed. In the evening, the patient's condition deteriorated. She was reintubated. The blood counts increased markedly. The X-ray chest showed lung field haziness. On the next day, the TTE was repeated again. Again, similar findings, restriction of mobility of the valve. There is certainly restriction of mobility in both the views that we see. And we can see that the very turbulent flow across the valve, and the mean gradient is now 17.4 millimeters of mercury. So what happened here? Well, I looked through the literature and we found that acute mitral stenosis following mitral valve repair is a rare but severe complication. In this particular study, the medical records of 552 consecutive patients undergoing mitral valve repair at a single institution were reviewed. And they analyzed the transesophageal echo of these patients immediately after the patient came off bypass, and they recorded the transmitral pressure gradients and the pressure half time. So all the patients undergoing mitral valve repair at Brigham and Women's Hospital in these 2 years were analyzed. Out of these, 27 patients were rheumatic heart disease patients who had a mitral valve repair. The others were of varying different causes. And the decision to return to cardiopulmonary bypass and redo the MVR was individualized based on the degree of hemodynamic instability, comorbidities, and so on. 9 patients, that is 1.6% of the total patient population, with intraoperative evidence of TE, of restricted mitral valve leaflet motion, they underwent reoperation for mitral stenosis prior to hospital discharge. 4 of these 9 patients underwent surgical revision, and all patients were receiving inotropic and pressor support. All patients survived to be discharged from the hospital. And this authors concluded that the peak and the mean transmitral pressure gradients proved most reliable for detecting post-operative acute severe MS, and they were easy to acquire and reproducible. The pressure half time was not useful, PISA was not validated, and 3D TE measurements of mitral valve in this area, in this situation, had not been studied. So that was my case, and the conclusion that we came to was, of course, that it was a iatrogenic mitral stenosis. The surgeon had in his enthusiasm to repair the valve, created a mitral stenosis, which caused the patient to go into pulmonary edema within a few hours after the surgery. The TLC rose because presumably she developed an infection. The surgeon was worried about going in with such a high TLC, so nothing much was done. And the patient eventually succumbed on the third postoperative day. Now, lessons to be learned from this study. I feel maybe if I had been a little more emphatic in discussing the findings of the surgeon, though we did discuss the findings, if I had been more emphatic that the only way to save this patient would be to go in and redo the surgery, maybe this patient could have been saved. I don't know. Hindsight is always 20/20. But this patient we lost, and it's a very memorable case for me, though not in a very good way. That's all I have to say. Thank you so much.
And may I now please discuss with the Niloufar Fatima from Bangladesh, the service company, and she will talk about all in the right side.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes.
Can you see my?
Yeah, you can see your slides. Yeah.
Okay. Can you see my slides?
Yeah, absolutely correct. Go on.
So I am Dr. Niloufar Fatima Chaudhary, consultant, Department of Cardiology, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujib Medical University, Dhaka, Bangladesh. Thank you, Cardiac Society of India, West Bengal branch, for arranging such a big cardiac imaging conference. I'm going to present today adult congenital heart disease with refractory heart failure. My first case is 18 years male, short of breath on exertion, fatigue, which is progressive for 1 year. Patient is cyanosed, SpO2 is 90 in room air, pulse is 78 beat per minute, which is regular, blood pressure 110, 75 millimeter of mercury. First heart sound is splitted, and second heart sound is also fixed splitting. And there is systolic murmur in parasternal region. JBP raised, AWAVE is prominent, hepatomegaly, and mild leg edema. This is the chest X-ray peer view showing cardiomegaly with RV type apex. And the ECG of patient shows short peer interval with delta wave present, so more in favor of WPW syndrome. This is the parasternal long axis view of this patient, which shows the dilated RV, and mode shows good LV systolic function with mild pericardial effusion with a dilated RV. And this is the RV focused modified four-chamber view showing the septal leaflet of the tricuspid valve is more apically placed, and the anterior leaflet of the tricuspid valve is moving very well, and the functional RV is preserved well, and there is a echo dropout in mid interatrial septum. Color flow showing tricuspid regurgitation, and left to right shunt through interatrial septum. And subcostal view confirming the interatrial septum, the interatrial septal defect, and large. This atrial septal defect is large with good mitral and posterior rim, and there is free RVOT and also good aortic rim. TAPSE is normal, so RV function is normal. So my echo diagnosis for my first case is situs solicitus, normal atrioventricular and ventricular arterial connection, absent anomaly type A with atrial septal defect secondary type and moderate tricuspid regurgitation, mild pericardial effusion, good LV systolic and diastolic function, and fair RV systolic function. My second case is 22 years old female, short of breath on exertion and fatigue and progressive, which is progressive for 3 years. On examination, pulse is 84 beat per minute regular. Blood pressure is 100/70 millimeter of mercury. First half sound is splitted. There is systolic murmur in parasternal area, JBP raised, airway prominent, hepatomegaly and leg edema. So here is also we see the dilated RB which compressed the LV and good LV systolic function. Here the septal leaflet of the tricuspid valve is more apically placed than my first case, and the anterior leaflet of the tricuspid valve is not moving that much, and the actualization of the RV is more bigger than my first case, and this part is also dilated, and the functional RV is very small. So the distance between the mitral valve and tricuspid valve around 43 millimeter. And here also we confirm the anterior leaflet is not moving at all. And color flow showing the tricuspid regurgitation. And in subcostal view, the inferior vena cava is dilated, and there is no respiratory variation. So the echo diagnosis for my second case is situs solitus, normal atrioventricular and ventricular arterial connection, abstain anomaly type C, severe tricuspid regurgitation, compressed LV with normal LV function, radon diastolic dysfunction of LV, and moderate RV systolic dysfunction. So abstain anomaly, the pathological anatomy is the failure of the delamination of the tricuspid valve leaflet and a more apical displacement of the functional tricuspid annulus, and septal leaflets are more apically displaced than posterior leaflet than anterior leaflet. And dilatation of the atrialization part of the right ventricle, and anterior leaflet, there may be fenestration, redundancy or tethering, and dilatation of the true anatomical tricuspid valve annulus. The Carpenter classification, we know that type 1 is the volume of RV is well preserved. So my first case is type 1. And type 2 is a large atrialization of the RV wall, and there is anterior leaflet can freely move. And type C is there is restriction of the anterior leaflet movement. So my second case is type C. And type D is near complete atrialization of the RV. So natural history is prenatal poor prognosis, severity related to the RV and LV function, and late diagnosis is associated with the reduced survival. Arrhythmia, 51% cases are present with arrhythmia, and predictors are the if chest XPAV shows the cardiothoracic ratio is more than 0.65, and severity of tricuspid valve displacement, more apical displacement, and NYHA class 3, 4, cyanosis, severe TR, and younger age at diagnosis. Associated cardiac defects are ASD, which is present in my first case, and VSD, RV outflow tract obstruction, PDA, coarctation of aorta, accessory conduction pathway, that is WW syndrome, which is also present in my first case, and corrected TGM. Our next plan will be the cardiac catheterization to look for any other shunt and confirm the diagnosis, and followed by surgery. The indication of surgery is heart failure, cyanosis, and type of surgery is done by ventricular repair, right ventricular exclusion, and total ventricular exclusion, and at last the heart transplantation. Early mortality, the prognosis, the early mortality after surgery is early mortality 1%, survival is good if the surgery done in due time is 76%, and survival if done late, then it came into 20 years time, it came to 46%. 83% may remain in NYHA class 1 and 2. 34% has no need of any cardiac medication. Problem are the late reoperation and rehospitalization and atrial tachyarrhythmias. Thank you for your patient hearing. In that week, I got 2 abstinent cases, so I will not forget that particular week of our university eco life.
Thank you, Dr. Nilufar Fatima. And we will move on to our next speaker for this session. May I please request Dr. K. Shiva Kumar to present his case. And he will talk about dilemma of disconnected PA and double P.
Hello, am I audible and are the slides visible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. This is about a 3-year-old child who has grown adequately, having normal play and activities. Occasionally was having some episodes of wheezing and was treated on a couple of occasions with inhalers. Not suspected to have any heart disease as there were no major abnormal CVS findings. A very recent echo, there was a suspicion of a PDA. So they were sent for a pediatric cardiac evaluation. On clinical examination, the saturations were normal. The pulse volume was normal. There was no cardiomegaly. There was no murmur, no significant precordial bulge, but there was a loud second heart sound. If we carefully look at the chest X-ray, there is not too much of cardiomegaly, but there are a few end-on vessels that are seen on the right lung fields. And definitely the vascularity does not seem to be significantly elevated, but there are multiple end-on vessels. And the main pulmonary artery segment is appearing full. The ECG shows right ventricular hypertrophy. There is a right axis deviation. There are no LV forces. So we did an echocardiogram. The apical 4-chamber view was looking normal. Right atrium, right ventricle, left atrium, left ventricle. Nothing significantly abnormal in this view. No VSDs. This is a subxiphoid short axis view. We can appreciate that the LV and RV are of normal size, but when during the peak of systole, the septum is flattening, indicating that there may be a pulmonary hypertension. Atrial septum is intact. Superior vena cava is draining now into the right atrium, and atrial septum is intact. Long axis parasternal view was looking normal, normal outflow tract, the normal right ventricular outflow tract, and towards the region of the distal main pulmonary artery, there is a red flow that is entering into the pulmonary artery, suggesting that there may be a PDA. So we turned attention to that. So there is a definite red flow entering into the distal main pulmonary artery. When we interrogated the pulmonary regurgitation, there was a trickle of pulmonary regurgitation which gave a peak pulmonary regurgitation of around 56, indicating that there was quite a severe pulmonary hypertension. So on short axis, we found that the main pulmonary artery was directly continuing only as the right. There is no left at all. And if you carefully see, there is a large ductus here that is entering into the right pulmonary artery. The blood is flowing from aorta into the pulmonary artery in diastole, but during systole, there seems to be a right-left shunt. So if you look at the frozen frames, this is the diastolic frame where the ductus is flowing back, but in systolic frame, it seems to be the blood is going from the pulmonary artery towards the descending aorta. When we looked at the suprasternal view, we identified that it is a right aortic arch with the left innominate as the first branch. And at the base of the left innominate, there was a PDA. That PDA was now filling the left pulmonary artery. So left pulmonary artery is isolated from the main pulmonary artery. Isolation of left pulmonary artery is disconnection of the pulmonary artery away from the main pulmonary trunk. So here we have a left-sided PDA which is supplying this isolated left pulmonary artery. And already we saw a large right PDA entering into the right pulmonary artery. So we have two separated pulmonary arteries, two separated hemodynamics. The right pulmonary artery is having severe pulmonary hypertension because it is in free communication with the aorta through a large PDA. Aorta and RPA pressures are same, severe right-sided pulmonary hypertension. And to quantify whether it is an obstructive pulmonary hypertension or a hyperkinetic pulmonary hypertension, there is no LA-LV dilatation. There are no LV forces on the ECG. no significant chest X-ray in cardiac enlargement or plethora, and clinical murmur is not there. So whether there is a right-sided pulmonary vascular disease. Left side PDA is very restrictive and very small with an isolated LPA. If there was a large flow, we would have picked up a continuous murmur, but the flow was so little that this flow was extremely low. So the left lung is very oligemic. So what is the treatment? We have to connect the LPA to the main pulmonary artery, or in other words, unifocalize the left pulmonary artery to the main pulmonary artery and divide both the PDA. But the question is the right lung already having established pulmonary vascular disease? Are we already too late? If the right lung has pulmonary vascular disease, then postoperatively, when you connect the main pulmonary artery to the left, the blood will entirely go to the left lung, resulting in postoperative left lung hyperperfusion and left lung pulmonary edema, sometimes left lung pulmonary hemorrhage. Cardiopulmonary bypass will further aggravate the right-sided PVR. So, do we get any favorable clues about operability? If there is an LALV volume overload on echo, we are happy. If there is an aortic runoff in the descending thoracic aorta, we are happy. Unidirectional left-right flow in the PDA, we will be happy. If there is a prominent LV forces in the ECG or cardiomegaly in the chest X-ray with plethora of the right lung, or if there is a good clinical murmur indicating high flow, or if there is a high volume pulse with wide pulse pressure, we'll be happy. None of these things were there. The only favorable sign was leg saturation was 95. So there was no differential cyanosis. That means the child has not gone into Eisenmenger syndrome. So how to identify what is the pulmonary vascular resistance on the right side? So now we did a catheterization. This is the aortic catheter. The aortic catheter shows that it is a right aortic arch with a large PDA that is supplying only the right pulmonary artery. We entered through that narrow restrictive ductus into the LPA from the left-sided PDA. So the right-sided PDA is very large, causing pulmonary hypertension, and left-sided PDA is very restrictive, causing LPA oligemia. Cardiac catheterization showed that SVC to pulmonary artery, there is only 3% step up. And pulmonary artery pressure and aortic pressure were almost the same on the right side. But the left side was non-pulsatile trace with only 10 millimeters of mercury. So this is the right pulmonary artery and the aorta, almost similar, equally touching each other. So how do we find out what is the pulmonary vascular resistance on the right side? Oximetry cannot help because right pulmonary artery is getting venous blood and left pulmonary artery is getting arterial blood. Perfusion scan cannot be done because there is no way to inject technetium labeled macroaggregated albumin into the left lung. MRI cannot be done because MRI will pick up turbulence in the left pulmonary artery due to the narrow PDA. And moreover, in a small baby, to put the child onto an MRI and he have a sedation within a magnet is all technically difficult. So what we did was, we have balloon occluded that pulmonary artery, and with the balloon, the pulmonary artery pressure dropped and the aortic pressure increased, indicating that indirectly right-sided lungs pulmonary vascular resistance is less than the systemic vascular resistance. So this is before and this is after balloon occlusion. The moment we got it, then subsequently we operated on this patient. So the interpretation of the cath data is that there is a severe right pulmonary arterial hypertension with only 3% step up, which means the quantum of left-right shunt is very minimal. But on balloon occlusion, there is a good separation. So we unifocalized the left pulmonary artery to the main pulmonary artery. With 3-month follow-up, there was completely no pulmonary hypertension with normal biventricular function. So what is the lesson that we learned from this patient? Disconnected pulmonary artery will have two different sources of blood flow. In this case, right pulmonary artery was from the RV, but also from the right-sided PDA, whereas left-sided pulmonary artery was entirely from the left PDA. They are exposed to different pressures and are vulnerable to develop different vascular resistance. Segmental pulmonary hypertension is more dangerous and has a more accelerated course because the right PDA is now supplying only the right lung. Calculation of flows and resistances in segmental pulmonary hypertension is very difficult. Thus, this patient adds a lot of educational value for decision making. So in the recent times, the patient that I have seen, I would say this is one of the best cases which I can use for giving a lot of educational value to people who are practicing pediatric cardiology. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. And with this, we will move on to the last speaker for the first session of the conclave. And may I now please request Dr. Esther Parashar to come and present his case, and he will talk about unusual mechanism and unusual combination of two common diseases, history of the misdiagnosis. May I please request Dr. Parashar to present his case. Thank you.
And today seems to be the morning of mitral stenosis. It is not a very unusual combination of the common diseases, but I think the mystery of the missing disease will continue for decades. And I think this cannot be created in our lifetime. We cannot connect it or so. Now, this was a 36-year-old female, 2005 shortness of breath, diagnosed as severe mitral stenosis. In 2006, she had a BMV in a leading cardiac center. Then she was better symptomatically. In 2011, because of a recurrence of symptoms, a repeat BMV was done at another leading cardiac center. Now, at one stage in the last 1 or 2 years, a 3D TE was done. And as you know, the 3D TE is also done in a sort of a big centers. And there are various findings, but the two main findings were a severe mitral stenosis with an area of about 0.8 centimeters square, and there was no other significant abnormality reported in the 3D TE. Then the patient, the slide is not moving, I don't know why. Yeah, so the shortness of breath persisted, and the main thing was there was a murmur of mitral stenosis, and a systolic murmur was heard. And this before the echo was thought to be because of a mitral regurgitation, as she was already on digoxin, furosemide, and other things also. So we repeated an echo and a TEE. Now in the ECG, you see there is no LVH, there is a LA overload, and there is an initial R wave in V1. Now, when we did the echo, the first thing which struck us was that there was a massive hypertrophy of the interventricular septum, and this was almost about 20 millimeters of mercury, 20 millimeters, and there was an asymmetrical septal hypertrophy. Then there were signs of mitral stenosis, and we can see a turbulence into the LVOT together with a doming. Again, you see in the next one, there was no SAM of anterior mitral leaflet, and there was only a large IVS hypertrophy and normal motion of the mitral wall, except the doming and then increased left atrial dimensions. Then aortic showed an intermittent mid-systolic closure of the aortic walls and in significantly increased LA enlargement. So this was also an important finding. The mitral wall area was about 0.8 centimeters square. Now, when we went to the apical 3-chamber view, you see that there is a anterior mitral leaflet which is completely abutting against the interventricular septum. So was this causing an LVOT obstruction or what? In diastole, which was not there, you can see the anterior mitral leaflet and the interventricular septum. It was not and you can see a turbulence present into the LVOT. But this was not a diastolic phenomena, because when we took an LVOT gradient, it was mainly in mid to late systole, and the gradient was about 113. And this gradient could have been affected by associated mitral stenosis, diuretics, possibly digoxin, and a small LV volume. So this value could have been more or so. So the first impression that there was a diastolic obliteration of the LVOT was removed by the presence of this late systolic gradient in the LVOT. Then a T was done mainly to see for a subaortic membrane which can mimic SCM. Then the LVOT, and again you see there's a marked thickening of the interventricular septum, and this is the anterior mitral leaflet, which no doming, but coming up almost up to the LVOT. So the management we advised in those patients that this patient was a mitral valve replacement and septal myomectomy. But the limitation was, and surprisingly, whenever you do a BMV, you do a complete evaluation of the person, both echo and clinically, and none of these findings were diagnosed there. But at that time, there was a limitation of his financial implications, and we were passing through a phase of a COVID epidemic. So the patient could not go to her home state, could not arrange finances. And one morning she developed an acute pulmonary edema from where she could not be resuscitated. So some of the unanswered questions in this case was, what was the mechanism of LVOT obstruction? Systolic, diastolic, how the diagnosis was missed so many times. I think this mystery will always remain, and how this diagnosis was done. Regarding the mechanism, one of the largest study we could get, well, it is such an uncommon condition that in a Mayo Clinic over a period of 22 years, they could report only 12 cases of a mitral stenosis and HOCM, but that too, their patient's age was about 70 plus minus 7 years. So this was most likely non-rheumatic and most of it degenerative. So because of age and rarity of the rheumatic fever, it was a degenerative, but this was a combination only reported in 12 patients. And the mechanism they postulated was four. Number one, a systolic anterior motion of the anterior mitral leaflet, which was not present in our case. Number two, a restricted motion of the mitral leaflet because of stenosis, and a SAM only of the leaflet tips, which was not present in our case. Then a hypertrophy of the septum encroaching on the LVOT, which could be a remote possibility, but not there because it was more uniform. And lastly, a calcified mitral valve encroaching on the LVOT. So that all these possibilities were not present in our case. So what would be the cause of an LVOT obstruction or a gradient? So we again went frame by frame. And here you see what we see, that it is not the mitral valve, it is the hypertrophic papillary muscle which is abutting against the interventricular septum. So do you see the papillary muscle, not at the mitral valve level? And then when we saw the turbulence, we see the turbulence also starting at the level of the papillary muscle and not much below. This will be much better seen again here. Now here you see, although the anterior mitral leaflet is coming up to this place, but you see it is the papillary muscle which is producing this LVOT obstruction by abutting against the interventricular septum, which can be seen in this view, which is much better. And the same thing was seen in a parasternal long axis view, that you see this is the papillary muscle level, which is producing an LVOT obstruction, and not by the usual mechanisms which have been reported in the literature. And during diastole, when you see this is red dot in diastole, there is no turbulence in the LVOT. So the diagnosis was mitral stenosis plus HOCM, and one of the most unusual mechanism of LVOT obstruction was present in this case, which is normally not so well seen, reported in the literature. And lastly, when do you suspect this combination? Because it can occur anytime. When to suspect? Awareness of the condition, signs of mitral stenosis, LV type of apex beat, ejection systolic murmur at the left mid-sternal border, and ECG signs of LVH, which unfortunately were not present in our case. So lastly, the take-home message is, do not be biased by a previous echo findings. Avoid a tunnel vision. If one would have noted these findings about 10 years back, possibly a precious life could have been saved, which was not possible in this case. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. And with this, thank you, sir. And with this, we arrive at the conclusion part of this session. Now, may I request the chairperson to go for the discussion session.
Thank you. All the speakers, they have displayed the excellent experience. We are very much enriched with all the cases you have displayed. At the same time, I also thank Dr. Aniruddha De, our chairman scientific session, to put such a session, excellent session, which probably I have not seen before. So let us come to our discussion part. So it is open to the forum. If any question, then I will summarize the cases. So if there is any question regarding any speakers, any topics.
So in the first case, one question from in the chat box is there. Dr. from Sammugasundaram. He commented that mid part of the to Dr. B. N. Jha, mid part of the atrial septum could have been exercised and patch closure should have been done in the second city. What is your comment about Dr. B. N. Jha?
This question is for
Dr. B. N. Jha.
Dr. Jha. Regarding recurrence atrial myxoma.
Dr. Sammugasundaram has questioned it.
Dr. Jha.
Yes, yes. Am I audible?
Yeah. He said mid part of the atrial septum could have been exercised and patch closure should have been done in the second city.
Because that is the area of attachment.
Yeah, area of attachment.
It is a pedunculated mass. So all time the surgeon remove the mass but keeping the seed intact. So his question is rightly addressed, whether it should be uprooted by excising the atrial septum.
Second time, when 2007, first time it was been done, the same surgeon did the second surgery. And in that time, according to him, he did the extensive resection, but double patch reconstruction is now one option in some center. I think that is one suggestion. But basically, extensive resection was done the best by the surgeon, consult the patient. He also consulted us, and together, all three of us, patient, myself, and my surgeon, and with due of their best care, he assured that we'll do the best part we can resect so that it should not recur. But it was also surprising for the surgeon also that third time it reoccurs.
Another question, Dr. Jha. Yeah, many times the recurrent CVA is due to the tumor embolization.
Yes, sir.
And
yes.
how far the anticoagulation prevent this embolization is yet to convince, because you have put this medical therapy as a last line to tackle this case. So this remains a question of debate whether the
together warfarin and antiplatelet ecosprin together we are keeping the patient 5-7 years. Initially 150 milligram and 5 milligram, and gradually 1-2 times we got some bleeding, particularly in the local, so we reduced 3 milligram warfarin and 75 milligram ecosprin. This way we are maintaining last 7 years. And others,
it is good for the patient, but it is very difficult to
how
it prevents tumor embolization.
Yes, sir. Yeah. One thing is that this tumor, once in 14, it was size in 3.5, gradually 4, but now it restricted almost last 3-4 years. Size is not increasing. It is up to around 4.8 something. Sir.
Probably this is the natural history of the myxoma. With the aging, there is a spontaneous tumor lysis or tumor halt in the tumor progression.
Yes,
because
sir.
basically it is a tumor of the middle age, and so with the aging, probably
the three more questions is there. One to Dr. Parasar, Dr. Sammugasundaram has commented. Dr. Parasar, your case should have be better called as mid-cavity obstruction rather than LVOT obstruction. Dr. Parasar, sir.
Once this mid-cavity came a bit later on when we were doing the echo or so, this mid cavity, or which is usually beyond slightly the papillary muscle, or it can be mid cavity also. It was only detected at when was a frame by frame analysis was done. So because we have not seen too many of the cases of a papillary muscle abutting against the septum. When you see a mid cavity obstruction, it is usually the muscles of the inferior wall and the septum which completely come and obstruct the left ventricular mid cavity. But here it was mainly the papillary muscle. I agree it is not the LVOT, because which I showed in a later images that it was mainly the papillary muscle which was producing, and it was also shown in the sub. So this may be a variety of a hypertrophic obstructive cardiomyopathy which can be at the LVOT level or at a mid cavity level, but it was only the mechanism which was only seen when we could see by frame analysis, and rather than somebody, one of our colleagues suddenly said it is a diastolic LVOT obstruction, but when we took a Doppler, it was a systolic phenomenon. So he's all right, it is not the LVOT obstruction, because the LVOT is mainly caused either, if you see the paper from the Mayo Clinic, they said LVOT can also be caused by a massive hypertrophy of the basal septum. And normally the cause is a hookup with the SAM, but the SAM was not present in this case. So definitely it is one of the obstructive varieties in which it is slightly more at the papillary muscle level. That is agreed also. So,
Yes,
but
sir. I
only
fully
point was
agree.
that how was it? Could it be an acute phenomenon? No, because such a massive sort of a abnormality how could have been missed for the last about 10-12 years or so. It could not have developed overnight or so. So that is the sort of a mystery in this case for the presentation also, and leading cardiac center.
This was a case of rheumatic mitral stenosis. No
Yes.
evidence of congenital mitral stenosis.
No, it was a rheumatic, because the patient gave a very classical history of a rheumatic fever in 1992. She had a classical history of a rheumatic fever and a rheumatic arthritis. So there was no reason of a congenital, and there are different varieties of a congenital mitral stenosis. It was a classical history in a 36-year-old lady with a history of a rheumatic arthritis in 1992, not a congenital one.
Yes, sir. I fully agree that whenever there is a LVOT obstruction, there should be a SAM, and absence of SAM indicates that it is not obstruction at the LVOT level.
At the LVOT.
So that is very unusual mechanism that probably we commonly we have not in mind. So we have missed. Probably many observers have missed.
Next question is what is the to Dr. Devika Chatterjee, what is the impact of mitral stenosis on hemodynamics of L-kappa and its symptoms?
Yeah, see, if there is pulmonary hypertension along with the mitral stenosis, then in that case, the blood flows from the pulmonary artery to the left coronary artery, even if there is no collateral. So the symptoms of mitral stenosis may be, may remain silent because of the raised pulmonary hypertension in presence of mitral stenosis if there is L-kappa.
Madam, lot of L-kappa patients present with dilated cardiomyopathy in the young. How was the ejection fraction in your case? LV function?
Yes, in this particular patient, LV systolic function was absolutely normal. There was no finding of ischemia like we get the endocardial fibrosis or papillary muscle fibrosis scarring. Nothing was there. This lady, she sustained all the injuries even at rest and with exercise. There was no finding of systolic dysfunction, no regional wall motion abnormality.
So that is the probably most unusual thing, because L-kappa should have been symptomatic before the symptoms of mitral stenosis develops. should have symptomatic,
Yeah.
either in the form of chest pain or in the form of LV dysfunction or some abnormal ECG.
Yes, so that is why
Abnormally, there should be abnormal ECG.
yes, this case was reported from our hospital. It was a very, very unusual presentation.
Yeah.
This girl was going from hospital to hospital with diagnosis of mitral stenosis. Then ultimately she came to us because of her shortness of breath. You know, the mitral stenosis was not so significant. The valve area was 1.2 with a mean gradient of 5 millimeter of mercury. But
It is
still
practically
she was-
negligible, mild.
Yes.
According to
Maybe
him,
mitral
negligible
stenosis is
mild.
protecting that L-kappa symptoms because LVEDP was not rising because of mitral stenosis.
Yes, but that happens in presence of pulmonary hypertension. So it was not there, but then patient didn't have, the patient had the shortness of breath. So that is why,
Shortness of breath may be due to the rise of left atrial pressure and increased pulmonary venous congestion, but LVEDP was not rising. LV function was preserved maybe due to this mitral stenosis that was preventing the dilatation of the left.
yes, that was covering up the symptoms.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now the question answer. I think the time is up, so it's better to wrap up this case. To conclude the session, Chairman is asked to conclude the session. Please, sir.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you to all the
Thank you.
speakers. Thank you all the
Thank you
speakers.
for having me in this session.
And thank you, our scientific chairman. So let us close the session.